Hey, all you beautiful folks out there. Thank you for joining me. I have Mr. David Speed on episode number 36, coming to us straight from the United Kingdom via the interwebs. He's over there in nice and frosty London. David is a professional graffiti artist and now runs a world-renowned graffiti business called Graffiti Life, which you can find at their beautiful site, graffitilife.co.uk. This is where you can find some of the work that they've done. These guys literally do photorealistic graffiti. They do many different types of art. You can actually sign up for classes to learn graffiti if you want to get into that as a hobby. And of course, any of the links to their social media and just anything that they got going on. David and his partners have created artwork for big companies like Vice, Nike, Disney, and other high-level clients. These guys are seen as some of the very best in the industry. We talk about his humble roots, the origins of graffiti itself. Not even lying, this stuff started in the 60s, the state of art, in the world, and even creative and podcasting advice. Find everything David and his team are doing at their site on Instagram, that's at graffiti_life, and Twitter, that's at graffiti_life, real easy. Also, check out David's podcast, super successful. We talk about it in the show. It's called Creative Rebels at rebelscreate.com. And of course, any of the podcast aggregators like iTunes, Google Play, or however the hell it is that you're listening to my podcast, those guys are on there as well. These guys debuted in like the top 5, and I believe it's in business. We talk about it in the podcast when it first came out. They're on episode number 8. They're kicking ass and taking names. David, thank you so much for taking the time to come on, man. It was such a fun interview. I think it was It was like 10 a.m. here in New Mexico and like 5 p.m. in London. That was the coolest like time change I've ever had. Dude was spot on, super quick, to answer my questions. There was no delay. This interview came out amazing because sometimes these remote interviews are just not at all what I would consider to be ideal for podcasting. Cheers, man. Hopefully I can make the trip to meet you in person one day. Check out everything A Perch of Birds is doing at facebook.com/APOB media. Of course, at aperchofbirds.com if you want to check out any of the stuff that I have there. And if you want to support my crazy ass project that I've been doing at episode number 36, I know, right? I can't believe it's already been that many. Go to patreon.com/APOB media. All right, guys, keep pursuing greatness and take a page from my man David's book and add some creative pursuits to your mix. Even if you're just doodling, do that shit. All right, guys, let's fire this thing up. So welcome to a Perch of Birds podcast, Mr. David Speed with Graffiti Life, world-renowned artist and graffiti, or how should I say this? Is it aerosol artist? What's the preferred verbiage for that?
Oh, I don't know. There's so many names. Street artist, spray can artist,
right?
Graffiti artist, former vandal. There's lots of descriptions.
That's awesome. It's and it seems like such a rebellious type of a job title. You know what I mean? I mean, there's no way to just say graffiti artist and not sound like a regular badass. Be like, what do you do for a living? Just tagging, bombing, right?
Yeah. It's not really like that anymore. But I mean, sometimes we do get asked to kind of go down that tagging route. So to explain to the listeners, I'm a professional graffiti artist. So it is actually my job to paint on people's walls, which is ridiculous. I understand it's the weirdest job on the planet, but yeah, I actually get paid to graffiti people's places, and I do a lot of like outdoor advertising. So we paint giant billboards and things like that. But yeah, sometimes we do get asked to like down and dirty. We want tags. We want you to kind of obliterate the place. But most of the time, we get asked to paint really beautiful artworks that are sort of photographic or kind of a bit more stylish than what you're mind might go to when you hear the word graffiti.
Right, like the typical 1970s, 80s, subway trains that are tagged up. That stuff doesn't really happen the same, or at least you guys are not perceived that way. Because, like you said, I saw Graffiti Life's website. You guys do a lot of stuff for big companies like Nike and Disney and bands and brands and things like that. And that seems like that's the mode that you guys are in constantly. I mean, being a professional graffiti artist, um, are you guys consistently hit up just for spray paint stuff, or is it, I mean, do you guys do other things like painting with, typical paintbrush and all that kind of stuff also?
Yeah, we do all sorts of things. So we started off just three of us. A lot of my friends and peers were kind of sent to prison for doing graffiti, and at that point, I sort
Wow.
of thought, yeah, I was like, okay, this is not going to end well.
Right.
I think at that age, when you're like, it seems to be a thing for young males specifically, but when you're a young guy at that age, you kind of feel like you're a bit invincible, and
Yeah.
you sort of think, oh, it won't happen to me. But I mean, recently in London, three kids were killed on the train lines.
Killed.
And I was putting
Wow.
myself, yeah. I mean, I was putting myself in some really dangerous situations. I was walking down the tracks at night, and I was kind of climbing up really high buildings and bridges and things like that. And I was taking a lot of risks. And at the time, I sort of thought, oh, it will never happen to me. But then when people that you painted with are getting sentenced to like 3 and 4 years in prison just for making artwork,
Wow.
it was like, okay, this is getting real, and this is something that I need to consider if whether this is my path. So that point was when the three of us started off, and you don't just set up a company and automatically, like Nike, start knocking on the door and saying, hey guys, come and paint for us.
Right.
So it was a long slow process. We've been around for 9 years now, and there's 15 of us now, so we've really grown. And what I always wanted to do is, as I saw people being sent to prison for it, I kind of thought this is a really positive art form. And when we're in the streets and people are going by, they're saying, oh, this looks amazing, you're brightening up the area. And they had all of these positive comments for us. But when you were looking in the papers and stuff, people were saying vandalism, destruction, and all of this kind of negative stuff.
Right.
So we wanted to build a platform basically where our friends could pay their rent, and not work a crap job and just paint on the weekends, where they could express their artwork. Because I think a lot of people used to look down on graffiti as an artwork, and what they didn't realize is that there's actually amazing artists that are behind some of this work. So to answer your question, a lot of our artists use spray paint, but they've also used brushes. Some of them have been tattoo artists. Like,
Sure.
we're just a bunch of artists who just like to use lots of different mediums. So for me, if I get a brief through, it's like, how can I produce the best image possible? And if that means I'm using brushes or stencils or whatever it is, then we'll use it, because we want to make the best possible artwork.
No, that's amazing. And it sounds like you guys are essentially reforming like the culture, or at least the perceived culture that, or basically changing it, right? Because I mean, like you said, and I would say here in the States, and it sounds like there in the UK, it sounds like the authorities still haven't caught up to the fact that it's just a lot of kids trying to express themselves creatively. And granted, they may not be doing it on properties that the owners would want them to do it on, but I'm sure that you starting a platform like this is that's going to embolden a lot of younger generations to be like, wow, I could actually make money at this, and still have a good time, expressing myself creatively. That's huge, man. Do you guys feel like you're becoming something like that, like kind of a beacon for younger generations to come along and show them a positive way to express themselves like that, to use the art for that purpose?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we've got an apprenticeship program. We've had 3 apprentices come through, and kind of started at a base level, and now they're all painting for us full time. And I love that, and that's something that I'm really proud of. Occasionally, I'll meet a young graffiti artist, and they're just like, look, I don't ever want to make money from this. I do it because I do it for the adrenaline rush. I do it because I want to fight the system, and I understand that. And I used to feel that way when I was younger as well. It's just I like to sort of let people know that there is another way, and that there's 2 paths really. There's the vandalism path, which is going to get you in trouble. Eventually it catches up to all of us. Or there's the kind of legit path where you could make some money and you could have some fun doing what you enjoy, rather than kind of looking over your shoulder every 2 minutes.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, so for that, I've heard that the apprentices were at one point called butlers. Is that still a thing?
Maybe that didn't come over into the UK. I've
No. Okay.
never heard that one.
Well, I was reading into it. You know, I'm a layman as a layman could come when it comes to graffiti. So I was reading into it a little bit. But there was a gentleman, Daryl McCrae, I guess, in Philadelphia, that was like supposed to be one of the first guys doing the, you know, what we consider to be modern graffiti. And they were talking about how that started in Philadelphia. So I figured that, you know, each one of these inner city areas where a lot of this would happen, you would see probably a big variation on what it meant, or what the, you know, even just the culture, like the way that things were talked about. So I don't know. I was thinking you guys might be at like Jedis and Padawans or something like that. I didn't know what you guys were going to call your apprentices. You know, I was like, man,
yeah, I prefer that.
There you go.
Yeah, Daryl McCrae is a fascinating story. Because I think a lot of people focus on New York when they think about the early days of graffiti.
Sure, Warriors, so the whole
like
bit.
Yeah, that's it. And we're talking about like the 1970s. And it seems, from all of the research that I've done, it seems to me that there was New York and there was Philadelphia, and it both started at the same time. And there's a lot of kind of claims being thrown around as to who the first graffiti artist was. But it seems like both of those cities, and I don't know what was going on in America during that time, but it just feels like something happened where for this kind of phenomenon to just start in both cities at the same time, culturally something must have been going on.
Right.
And I actually find the Philadelphia story more interesting than the New York story. The New York story was kind of, there was a guy called Tacky 183 who was a messenger who was traveling around the city. He definitely wasn't the first graffiti artist, but he was one of the most prolific. And the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times, might be the Post, but anyway, a newspaper picked up on the story and they printed it of who is Tacky 183, trying to find out. And he was just a messenger that was traveling around the city. Everywhere he went, he'd write his name on things, and that's why he got so well known, because he was just traveling all over writing his name. And as soon as that got posted, then people started copycatting, and because they realized that you could get fame because he got in the newspaper.
Sure.
But I think the story of Daryl McCrae is much more interesting. He was a kind of a young youth who was in trouble and in and out of skirmishes with the law, and he got locked up in a juvenile detention center. He got given the nickname Cornbread because he loved cornbread, and he just started writing it all over the walls of the detention center, all over everywhere, and like he did things like there was a story once where people thought he'd been killed because someone called Cornelius had been killed. And I think a journalist wrote a story because he was there when the shooting happened, and he heard people saying, "Oh, Corny's been shot." And he thought Corny was cornbread, but it was actually this kid Cornelius. And so Cornbread actually broke into the Philadelphia Zoo and wrote "Cornbread lives" on the side of an elephant to let everyone know that he was still alive. So he painted on the Jackson's 5 jet when they were touring and they dropped off in Philadelphia. He wrote "Cornbread" on the side of their jet. So he was just a special cat. And if it wasn't for him, who knows? Maybe there wouldn't be graffiti as it is today. So those cats really pioneered, and it's just grown from there and become something completely different.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Would you feel like when you were younger growing up that you kind of looked up to guys like that, like, you know, use the mythos of that, you know, as a you know, I want to be kind of like him kind of thing, or did that at least motivate you somewhat?
It was weird because in the 90s we didn't have access to the internet, so all you would hear is just kind of stories. And there were 2 books, one called Subway Art, one called Aerosol Art, that made their way over to the UK in the 1980s. And we'd kind of see these books, and a few people would, if they'd been on holiday to New York, then they kind of see the graffiti. And then, but in the UK, the graffiti scene over here was mostly started by punks, and it was kind of very, very different to what the guys were doing in New York. It was tagging, but a lot of our tagging was a lot more kind of political, and it was like anarchy and all of that sort of stuff. So it was very different. And when it wasn't like I hadn't heard of Cornbread or Tacky or any of the early guys really until the internet came along, because we had Subway Art, and so we knew the artists that were featured in those books. people like Dondi and just like amazing legends like that. But it wasn't until, but Cornbread's not featured in any of those books. And then all of a sudden you start Googling. And so it's not until like the early 2000s that I started finding out about people who've been painting since the 1970s.
That's amazing, man. And then, I mean, with the scene down there, when did it become less of the punk like political stuff and more of like the creative expressionism and like tagging your route, trying to show off, oh, I'm a better artist than so and so on the street over? When did that? I mean, do you feel like that was the 90s, or was that like just right out of that punk era?
Yeah, it was the 80s and 90s. There were definitely a couple of guys over here doing stuff in the 80s. So like Goldie, who you may have heard of, because he's quite a famous musician. There was a guy called 3D who went on to, he's part of the band Massive Attack.
Oh yeah, I love that band.
Yeah. So he was a big graffiti writer. There's a lot of rumors that he might actually be Banksy, but who knows? I don't know. I don't know about that one. But yeah, there was a lot going on in the 80s, and definitely that was when we sort of started to develop more of a London style, and it was kind of inspired by the New York guys. But it was, I guess, it was a lot harder. It was a lot kind of rough around the edges compared to sort of the colorful wild style stuff that was happening in the States.
Would you say that the authorities kind of they were more aggressive to stamp it out because like they saw that there was that was happening in the States, and they just kind of tried to get ahead of it by making I guess what I'm asking is when you that first started out, were they putting people in jail right away, or was it something like, you're just getting a ticket, or was it, I mean, did they just jump to, this is blasphemous, get it out of here, you're in jail?
Yeah, I think it took a time for it to really get bad. I know when I first started painting, I was sort of looking at the risks, and everything that I understood at the time when I was painting was like, oh, if I get caught, it's going to be first offense and it will be a slap on the wrists. And then as time went on, it started to get more and more serious. And then as people that we knew were starting to get arrested, I mean, because now if you get caught painting on a train now, they class it as terrorism, and you can get a prison sentence instantly.
So that's kind of like the equivalent to a felony here, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, it's real serious kind of consequences now. And when I first started, it didn't feel like it was that serious, but then maybe I just wasn't educated to the law, and perhaps it was, but it certainly didn't seem like that.
Well,
and, and I certainly know of artists that were they were picked up, they were given a slap on the wrists, and they were told not to do it again, and they were let go. And now that certainly doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Well, I think what you could say on that, David, is you just didn't get caught, bro. You were good. Right?
Yeah, we used to treat our missions kind of like a military operation. So
that's awesome.
We always wanted to minimize risk, and at the same time, like we didn't think we were doing anything particularly bad. Like we were just creating artwork. We weren't painting on people's houses. We weren't tagging on people's cars. We were just going to like kind of by the side of the railway, on a big kind of blank wall, and creating something colorful and beautiful, that we thought anyway. And it's funny, I've done commissions for both Network Rail and the Metropolitan Police since being professional. So there's kind of this weird sort of so when they're on your side, then it's fine, and if they're chasing you, then it's not. So it's a weird one.
So when you tell them, you say, see, it looks beautiful. You just didn't give me a minute to show you what I could do,
Exactly.
What got you into graffiti, man? What was like your beginnings? I mean, did you just start drawing right off the bat, and then that kind of one thing led to another, and you were out, bombing eventually, or how did that go?
So I used to see it on the side of the railway line as I was sort of traveling around London, and I was always fascinated by it, even when I was like 9-10 years old. But it was really hard to get into back then, because there was no internet, there was no kind of easy path into it. Because now you can go online, you can buy spray paint online, get it sent to your house, and there you go. You can just go and start painting.
Sure.
And you can connect with other artists so easily. But when I was coming up, which was like 99, 2000, the internet existed, but it wasn't what it is now. So you'd have to get lucky. You'd have to you'd have to find someone painting and go up and speak to them. And that's like, that's risky, and it's so much easier to connect online. So so for me, I just happened to meet someone who was a graffiti artist, and we got on like a house on fire. He saw my sketchbook because I was always kind of drawing like comic book characters and stuff like that. And he was like, "Oh, you should come and paint a wall with me." And I was like, "Well, that sounds dope." So,
Right.
and it just went from there, and then kind of consumed me from that point on. I was just like obsessed with graph. I just wanted to paint all the time, and I was working like kind of crap jobs that I hated, and just in order to get money for paint. That was all it was. I just wanted to get money so I could buy paint. And yeah, and that was it. It was just and that was 10 years I spent before we started the company, of just sort of painting in the streets and practicing and getting better and just making art.
That's amazing, man. I think speaking to technology, like how you're saying that, nowadays kids can kind of get online and they can start to, find a network or community. I know that I can't remember the name of the actual application. I think it's a Google application, but it's the 3D painting stuff. Have you seen any of that when it comes to virtual reality?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, I used some of that. I had a buddy of mine that, Tilt Brush by Google. And you can go into basically like a virtual 3D space and create I'm no artist, but I just loved how my hands became essentially 3D or virtual spray cans, and I was making like trees, and then I was like walking through the trees and I could walk around my artwork. Do you guys get any requests for stuff like that, or is that something that you see on the horizon for your guys' Graffiti Life company?
Yeah, so we've started incorporating augmented reality into some of our murals, where you'll kind of hold your phone up to the mural and it will start to come to life in different ways.
Oh, that's cool.
We're working for a music artist coming up. There's a rapper over here in the UK called Gigs, and we have a project coming up with him where he's basically going to come to life within the mural, which is going to be super cool. We're really looking forward to doing that. But I think, I quite often get asked, like, what do you think the future of graffiti is? And I think people expect me to say, like, oh, it's going to get wiped out of the cities or whatever. But I think there's definitely a digital future for graffiti. I think that, imagine kind of just breaking into spaces online. Imagine if you came onto your like Facebook homepage one day and there was just like artwork going over the Facebook page, something like that. I feel like that's something that could definitely happen in the future. And especially when we start looking at these technologies like the stuff you're talking about with Google and using these brushes and creating these, because the world's going that way. The world's going AR and VR. And,
absolutely, yeah.
As long as you've got people that are creative, there's always going to be stuff popping up. So yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting time. Like the next 10 to 15 years is going to be incredible in that space.
Yeah, there was a podcast I had done with some gentlemen that run it's like an online meeting space, kind of similar to like what we're using here with Zoom or like Skype, but you're wearing virtual headsets, and they have like a classroom that they'll pull up. Harvard bought into it, Full Sail University, they're like a big art college down in Florida. And I know that they're kind of expanding real big, but we were basically doing the podcast in that space, and we were able to pull up like 3D rendered cars and different artwork and stuff. Oh, it was so cool, man. And then he pulled up like a heart, and he was showing like the potential for medical students to be able to see like a heart as tall as you are, and you can walk right up to it, you can lean left and right, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I was just blown away by it. I said, this has got so many implications, and there's things that they're not even thinking of. Like I just put this kind of together talking to you. Like you could have an art class inside of there instead of just a boring flat screen and a professor talking. You could actually be like, make me a forest, make me a space mural, whatever. That is so cool. The one thing that I noticed and the one thing I noticed that you guys are really good at is creating this artwork that, it pops, man. Like it's super beautiful. And I think the better technology gets, the more accessible it'll be for people. When you don't have to wear a bulky ass headset, and a giant computer to make any of that work, that's probably going to be where that bridge is crossed finally by some of these up and coming digital artists. That's going to be a whole new thing. I won't even be able to call them graffiti artists, call them digital graffitis, something. I don't know. So
for sure, man, it's going to be wild.
So I apologize. I tangent quite a bit when I run these podcasts. So worldwide, speaking of just kind of the way that graffiti poured over from the States, let's say, and then, got into the UK. Is this a movement that you're seeing worldwide as well? Is there a lot of this stuff catching on more in the legal sense, I guess, more now that we've got, social media and stuff like that? Do you see that it's more of a worldwide phenomenon, or is it mostly centered around these hotspots like Philadelphia, New York, London? What is your opinion on that?
No, it's absolutely worldwide. It's hard to find any city in the world that doesn't have some graffiti.
No, that's true.
Literally, yeah, Brazil, Australia. I'm yet to find a country because I know people have even like painted in Iceland and places like that. There's artwork everywhere.
Wow, in Iceland, do you feel like there's like a rep kind of thing? Like, hey, we got better artists here in London than they do in Iceland. Is that like a thing?
I think it used to be until the internet came along, but now it's just rather than a specific place, it's just all on just the artists now. And I think it's just people building their own individual reputations and carrying that rather than sort of a specific area. I know that, it's always going to be larger in big cities. I think just because there's more opportunities, there's more spaces. And typically it seems that it's more kind of embraced in a big city. So I'm from Shoreditch in East London, and around here it's almost like a tourist attraction because there's street art tours that you can do around the area where guides will take you around and tell you about the different artists that painted the pieces and stuff. And a lot of artists, international artists, will fly in and they'll go to Shoreditch to paint because they know that's where their work's going to get the most kind of bang for their buck, like the most people will see it. So it's definitely become sort of a more accepted. Like, I know that in East London they wouldn't want to get rid of the graffiti because they know that people go to the area specifically to see it.
Oh, that's interesting. So essentially, with the advent of like social media and stuff like that, each person is trying to show off their skills, and it doesn't, it's they're individually an island. It's not really like a group of people so much as it used to be, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, what is your thoughts on Banksy? Since he's such a such a secretive character, and maybe just for people listening, can you explain kind of in the short, because you'd understand it much better than I would. Who is Banksy?
So, as far as I understand, Banksy is a team of people. It's kind of a brand with one guy at the center. I don't know him, so I can't really comment with too much authority. But there's a lot of, so within the graffiti community, there's a lot of people who aren't that fussed on Banksy because he makes his artwork with stencils, which obviously anyone can do. But I have seen him actively say, I don't know why you guys are getting so riled up about my artwork. Anyone can do this, which is true.
Right.
But he does have incredible ideas. And I think that without Banksy, I wouldn't have a job. So
wow.
It was Banksy that kind of brought the general public around to this art form. It was Banksy that sort of started appearing in like coffee table books and really he's the most famous, one of the most famous artists of all time. Like scratch graffiti eyes, he's literally one of the most famous artists of all time. He gets mentioned in the same sentence as like Keith Haring or a Damien Hirst or any kind of famous artist. People know Banksy as well. My grandma knows who Banksy is. So, he's so well known, and I think he did so much for turning the tide where in the 90s we were being like chased and it was illegal and still up until sort of the mid 2000s as well. But he did so much to kind of put the public's attention onto this art form, and almost like a gateway drug. A lot of people discovered Banksy first, and then that kind of whet their appetite. So they started looking more into it, and then they found more and more artists and just realized, okay, there's a lot of guys who are creating amazing artwork. So I'm very grateful for Banksy. I think that because if the public didn't like graffiti, then I wouldn't have a job, because no one would be willing to pay for it. So I'm kind of quite glad that he came along, and I'm glad to see all the success he's had. And some of the stunts and stuff he does are just incredible. We went to DismaLand, the crap theme park that he built. I
saw that.
It was wicked. It was so good.
That is so.
Good. Yeah. all the people that worked there were kind of actors, so they're all like acting really miserable. And if you ask them the question, they kind of ignore you or like swear at you. Or
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
It was so funny. We didn't expect that as well. It was so funny. So so we're queuing up, and it was me and a couple of the guys from work, and we're in the queue, and it had been raining outside, so we had our umbrellas with us, and they were like kind of covered with rainwater. And so one of the girls steps forward, and the guy goes, "Oh, can I just see your umbrella?" So she passes her umbrella to him, and he just holds it above her head and shakes all the water out of the umbrella onto her head. And she was so pissed because like she had pristine hair or whatever, and she'd been protecting it from the rain, and he just soaked her with this umbrella. When I stepped forward, the guy took my ticket and then screwed it up and pushed it into my mouth. They were all like fully into this joke, which was really funny, and none of them smiled. Like whatever they did, none of them smiled. It was really, really funny. And then all of the exhibits and stuff in there were amazing. And what I really like about it as well is that he put on a load of artists. So he gave a lot of opportunities to sort of younger upcoming artists by displaying their work within the show, which has allowed them to sort of use that as a springboard from there, which was great.
That's amazing, man. That's cool to see this change, you know, from what it was seen initially, and it was just kind of this crazy rebellion kind of thing to now becoming like, I mean, it's a force in the world, you know what I mean? And then to especially step up to something as big corporate wise in the art world as Disney, essentially, because that's what DismaLand was a play off of. And for anybody listening, DismaLand, like more or less was just it was like a theme park that was just kind of a I don't know, like a faux version of Disney.
The world's worst theme park, yeah.
Yeah.
Like a broken down Disneyland.
Right, but if you of course, Google it, it just looks beautiful. And like you said, it was a showcase for so many people to be able to do stuff. Are you familiar with, have you ever heard of Meow Wolf before?
I don't think so.
So there's a similar theme for, and I believe it's just a company or, something kind of like a collection of artists that created a brand. And they've got one here in Santa Fe, and then I know they've opened one in Denver, because I'm in New Mexico. So there's one here in Santa Fe, and then there's one in Denver, Colorado. And they essentially are like, you go inside of this place and you walk into an indoor building, and it's built by artists completely. And you come in and there's like houses like a house in the front. You come in the front door and you're following a story. But like, you see the refrigerator opens, you go down a tunnel, and then you go into like these different huge pieces of rooms, kind of like a living piece of artwork. I couldn't even explain it. Like there's just, they have tons of different artists that got to put pieces of this thing together. I think you'd love to see that, just Googling it. But it's the same kind of concept, of course, not as big, and then it's not outside. But it's a constant thing, and it's like a museum. So you can get tickets to go in there. You can go with your family and stuff like that. But each piece of it just is like this connecting. You can walk through the fireplace. You can open things up, and there's just this crazy artwork. I mean, it's the most gorgeous thing, and I'm starting to see more of that stuff. I think even the bigger corporations like Disney and stuff are going to start to see that this is stuff that people are truly appreciating, because you've got to step out of the norm in order to kind of like strike awe into people. And then, I mean, this is really going to motivate younger generations again to try something different, to do something that's just not the same cookie cutter kind of artwork that you get taught in school or whatever.
Definitely. I think the school system, is broken. I mean, certainly in this country, we're operating on a like 200-year-old system. And school hasn't really changed since then. And you've got kind of all the kids sitting in rows. Basically, it's designed to build factory workers. Right. And it's preparing these kids for a future that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we've got all of these technologies. We've got kind of AI and all of that stuff coming in. Everything's going to be automated. And I really feel that the creative people are going to be the ones that win, because that's the one thing that robots can't do. They can't be creative. So I think that like these opportunities and these places, they're so important, and art is so important. Certainly in the UK, art currently is really struggling. Like as a subject in schools, it's getting cut out of a lot of schools because they're just focusing on maths and science and all of those kind of subjects. And I mean, we'd be lost without the artists. Like it's so important. And I mean, when I've got an iPhone in my pocket and I can just pull it out and do any calculation or Google any fact, like, what are you teaching us in these schools? Like, you need to teach us how to be creative, how to problem solve, how to use artwork. Like teach us about money, teach us about how to get a mortgage and all of these like important life skills. But instead, they just teach us some facts that we have to regurgitate back to them.
I'm so glad you
And I
said
just
that,
think
man.
it's a broken system.
I talk about that all the time because I've got 3 kids myself, and this standardized testing that was a big thing here. And I don't know, of course, how you guys have it over there, but the focus is completely against anything that's arts and music. I remember having choir class and music class where you would just do the most fiddly stuff, but you're playing with instruments and you're doing things you'd never get exposed to if your parents weren't pushing you into that direction. And a lot of that's lost now. A lot of my kids don't. They
And yeah, obviously they worried about my safety, which is obviously what parents do. But yeah, they were super supportive, and when I said to them, look, I think I'm going to do this for a career, they were like, well, just see if you can make it work, go and try it. They didn't sort of tell me not to. So yeah, I credit them with a lot. But yeah, unfortunately, no teachers apart from the ones who told me that I couldn't do it.
Right. No, and I feel I got the same kind of thing with IT, man. I mean, I know that it's absolutely not a creative at all, but I was always kind of the indoor kind of kid playing a lot of video games and jacking with computers. And I don't know how many blue collar types would tell me like you need to learn how to work on cars and blah blah blah. And I had an interest in it in one respect, but it just wasn't me. And because they would just tell me like you'll never do shit with those computers, here I am, basically working for the feds doing something with computers now, and it's like that's my career. That's what I and I love it because it was the same kind of thing for me. It was like my rebellion to those people that had kind of told me no all the time, because it truly was my interest, even if it be something that at the time wasn't, I guess, beneficial to science and math or whatever the hell, it was still, that was what I was into. So I can totally, level with you on that. What did you, I don't know if we covered this, but did you have were you apprenticing under somebody for graffiti? Whenever you'd said that there was a person that kind of had brought you into that lifestyle, but did they teach you how to like, get up and start doing the stuff outside and the bigger murals and stuff like that? Because I feel like that's such a large leap from like an art class or something like that to go and, take a spray can. It just seems, as a layman, again, hard. It would be preposterous to see me go out there right now and try to draw even a Mickey Mouse face or something like that. Did you have somebody that was showing you the ropes and kind of how it was done, or was it something that you figured out on your own?
Yeah, so my buddy who got me into graffiti, he sort of showed me a few basic things. But when I met him, he'd only been painting for maybe a year and a half, something like that. So
wow.
So there was a kind of there was a ceiling to his knowledge already anyway. So we really just trial and error picked things up by just practicing. I think there's this kind of myth of natural talent, and people feel like that some people are born with a gift. And I mean, you've seen our work. I paint sort of photorealistic imagery.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful.
And when we thank you. And when we paint that stuff, like people come over and they say, "Oh, you're so talented," which is a lovely sentiment. And I like truly, I'm really grateful when people say that. It's a lovely thing to say. But there's no such thing as natural talent. Like I wasn't born with a spray can able to create the images that I can create today. I just worked my butt off and practiced really hard. When I first started painting, I absolutely sucked. I was completely rubbish. But I just had a passion for it, and I just kept going. And I think the people who keep going, if they have an interest and they just keep going at something, they're the ones that always win. Because most people drop off. Most people start something and they're really passionate about it in the beginning, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And definitely now with social media, because we have this instant feedback kind of situation, they'll post something, and if it doesn't get enough likes, or I mean, people are expecting to build these absolutely huge audiences in such a short amount of time, and when it doesn't happen, they get kind of disheartened, and they stop doing whatever it is they were doing.
Right.
But the people that keep on, the people that start off with getting like 2 likes, and then they keep going and they keep going, and then 2 likes turns into 4 likes, 4 likes turns into 8 likes, and they just keep going. They're the people after like 3 years, because it always seems to me 3 years is such a magic number. If you do something and you put 3 years of your life into it and you dedicate that time to it, you can't help but make something happen. But most people don't have the determination to sit through that time.
That's huge that you're saying that, man. I mean, and that's the reason why I brought you on, because that's like the whole theme of the podcast is people pursuing greatness. And, I know that it's something that you can't just grab out of the air and just start doing it. And I think that's huge that you said that, because so many people will quit. I mean, podcasters, just as an example, a lot of them won't make it past their 7th episode because there's such a saturated market with podcasters now. Like everybody and their uncle has a podcast. But in the same breath, there's the people that will only get so far and then they'll quit because they're not getting that feedback. They're not getting that endorphin, that quick jump back to say, oh, I got these 1,000 likes, or my buddy got 1,000 likes. With my name on this podcast, A Perch of Birds, it's really not, it doesn't speak to what I do or what I'm, you'd have to kind of like dig into it. So for a long time, I didn't have any interest, and it just took effort, and there's that rule they talk about where it takes 10,000 hours, put into a craft or something in order to get to that point, like you're saying, where you're at least catching some traction and stuff like that. I think that's huge that you said that, because that can be motivation for people that are in that place. They're in that gray area where they're like, damn, I don't know if I should continue, but you should.
Yeah, you just have to keep going. Like 7's the magic number for podcast episodes, isn't it? It's normally after 7 that people quit. That's the average number. And it's crazy. I think that you just have to keep going, because if you do keep going, understand no one else is going to keep going. It's like the people that keep going are the ones that win, because everyone else drops out. So, so with our podcast, we launched it to number 1 on the iTunes business chart. And
congratulations, man.
Thank you. We're like, it's gone crazy. It's been ridiculous, actually. But yeah, so we launched it to number 1. But the way that we did that was very, very tactical. Like we put a lot of time and effort into finding out how to launch a number 1 podcast. And all you have to do is Google that. Like literally there's like 3 or 4 blogs that come up if you search like how to launch a number 1 podcast, with a bunch of people who kind of it will explain how they did it. And we're going to write something up on how we launched ours as well. And it's like, so we could have just launched the podcast as soon as we thought of the idea. But what we realized is we're going to have to build an audience for this before we launch the podcast. So that's how we're going to get to number 1, is because we're going to make people want it before it exists. So we started an Instagram account probably like a year or 6 months before we launched. And then we just started kind of developing relationships with influencers. So myself and my 2 business partners, we've got a lot of friends through doing Graffiti Live for so long. We've got a couple of other businesses. We've got a tattoo studio and stuff like that. So, but through that time, we've just built up such a network of people. And so we thought, okay, well, we can get them to post about it when it goes live. But then we started just making new relationships. So just networking, talking to as many people. And when it came to launch day, we added up all of the audiences of the influencers that we knew were going to post about it, and it came to like 1.5 million people.
Wow.
Was their total reach. And I mean, so you have to be realistic with that, because then that number gets way smaller when you take algorithms into account. And then when you take people's apathy into account, that number gets even smaller still, because you can show stuff to people all day long, but you have to find a way of get them to actually click it, to actually download and actually listen to it.
Lead the horse to water.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we knew it was going to be challenging, but that's what we did, and it worked. But we had to put in like a year's worth of hard work before even launching the podcast, which is crazy. But that's kind of, you have to put the work in, otherwise you don't get the rewards.
No, that's it. That's huge, man. And honestly, I don't have a niche. Like honestly, each one of these podcasts is so different that it was hard for me to do something like that. And I didn't really understand what I was going to do with this until I got going. So that's solid gold advice for you guys out there that have a niche. If you're doing something specific, you're doing something that is in a niche, you gotta talk to the influencers in your field, and you've got to build that up. And that's great advice, David. That is solid gold. If you guys can rewind that and play it like 3 times, write it down, because that's absolutely the opposite of what I did. And I'm just now getting to that point after a year and a half, but I'm realizing that there could have been a little bit more, a little bit smoother way of doing it. But I do this in a method that it kind of plays to my ego, because like I'll be like, oh man, I really like this graffiti stuff. Like I don't know anything about it, who's the baddest dude on the block. And then I had happened to see you come up, and I'd always wanted to talk to somebody that does that. And then I also have an affinity for the UK, as funny as that is. Like, I love anything that's of that culture. So I was like, man, this is so perfect. So here it is. I brought, and now I'm starting to get into that world. I've done more research in the last 2 weeks than I ever have about, the history and what's happening on social media. And I've gotten into some different groups on Facebook, as well as, finding some beautiful artists on Instagram. And I think that if more people kind of had that open mindset to learn about things like that, I think that they would be surprised at what they can do with their interests. Like, maybe you'll find out that you're into it and you had a talent, and now you start trying to do some graffiti stuff the legal way.
Yes, definitely. I think that's the amazing thing about podcasting is that it's bringing so many people together, and you can just have these cool conversations with people that are living on the other side of the planet.
That's
I mean, we couldn't do this 10 years ago. It just, the technology wasn't there to facilitate this.
Right.
And I think, you've got, look at Joe Rogan's podcast. I mean, the model of just having interesting people on every week is absolutely huge. Yeah. And I think anyone that does have a podcast, I would just encourage you to reach out to the people that you want to have on your show. Like, no matter how famous they are or well known they are, or how difficult you think it is to get them on the show. A couple of people that we've had on our show, literally, when we were first lining up guests, we didn't have an audience because we hadn't launched yet. So we couldn't say to someone, oh, we've got the #1 podcast. We're featured on Apple's New and Noteworthy. We get 1,500 downloads per episode. We couldn't say any of that.
Yeah.
So you just have to go to someone and go, well, this doesn't exist yet, but we reached out, but because we put together what I think was a really good email template that kind of was short. So, because I think people, they're really excited about the project, so they tend to talk about it a bit too much. And whoever they're reaching out to is probably busy. So you've just got to write down what your podcast means in one sentence. And this goes for, that goes for anything that you're trying to promote. Like, really, really try and get to the absolute core of it. Write it down in one sentence. Send it over to them. Say, look, this is what it's about. This is why I want you on the show. Like say something personal about them. I really like the work that you did on the recent campaign for so-and-so, or whatever it is that they've done. So a little bit about them. So kind of rub their ego a little bit. Say why you think they'd be an amazing guest. Say what you think that they could bring to your audience. So for us, our podcast is for creatives. It's for people that kind of want to quit the 9 to 5. So we'll say, we think that you will bring our audience so much value because you can talk about how you're a world famous tattoo artist, or how you've rebelled against the 9 to 5 because you're an author, or whatever it is. And we can kind of talk to them about why we think they'd be a good guest. And just a quick email. And maybe a lot of people are going to say no to you, but if you keep on asking, eventually people who you thought would never, ever, ever say yes will say yes, and you'll get them on the show. And then you can use them as a springboard to get more listeners in as well. So it works really well for that as well.
No, I think that's huge, man. Just because I don't want to miss it, what can you tell the audience what your podcast is, where they can find it?
Our podcast is called Creative Rebels. You can find it at rebelscreate.com. And we're also on Instagram, which is at rebelscreate. It's a weekly show, but we're thinking about we might start doing a few more extra kind of bonus shows to throw in as well. And it's just, it's interviews with creative people who have quit the 9 to 5, basically.
That's huge, man. And just to throw it out there for you, do you guys mess with Patreon at all, or something similar?
No. So we've decided to, for now, we're just kind of in an audience building stage. Sure. So we don't want to kind of, it's crazy. So we're only 7 episodes in, and we just got contacted by, I'm not sure if I should say the name, but a big software company that creates photo editing software.
Got you.
Those guys. Yeah. We've just been contacted by them. And so we're already getting offers of people to sponsor the podcast. So I don't want to do it. I want to kind of build the audience up first and not kind of annoy them with ads and stuff.
Right.
That's kind of quite important to me. Although if we did have someone supporting, then we would be able to pay for the for the podcast to be edited by someone else, because that does kind of eat up a lot of our time.
It is a pain in the ass.
So there's kind of there's kind of that. Yeah, it really is. So there's that there's both sides of it. I can see why a sponsor would be really attractive, because it would help us and we would be able to streamline things. But at the same time, I don't really want to advertise to our audience, not yet. I want them to have as much value as possible, so that after like 100 episodes of them being like, this is amazing content, then they won't resent an advert being played, because they'll be like, okay, well, you gave me so much value that I can't complain that you're doing an advert. You know, I don't want to kind of just start really early on and be advertising to them already. The Patreon model, I mean, I know people like Amanda Palmer, the musician, she's like queen of Patreon. But I don't know, I struggle with it. I'd rather do a sponsorship with a big brand than ask our listeners to give money, because I'm trying to help those like struggling artists and whoever that might need like that little kick to go and do, and money's tight, and I don't want to ask. I'd rather ask like a big brand for like 30k than I would ask all of our listeners for $1.
Right. No, and I totally get you there. And I think just two parts on this. The reason why I went in this direction is the thing I don't like is that I'm learning now how to use a lot of graphic software. I use Adobe Spark, which is like one that it's like a super shortened version of like Adobe Photoshop or something like that. But that's how I create all my graphics for anything that comes out for the podcast. But I love it, and I didn't know that I like doing stuff like that until I started doing the podcast. But in your guys' shoes, you guys have I mean, that's what you are as an artist. You're creative. And I with my Patreon, the reason why I haven't pursued it so actively, even now that I've been at it for so long, is because I don't really have something to give as value added to my listeners. I mean, I think giving like bonus episodes is a really great idea, but for you guys, you know, to have something like that where you guys can actually like come up with some artwork that nobody else will be able to see except for maybe those guys, I think something like that's huge. And people that are trying to start a podcast, or they're at that point where they're at, you know, those 100 episodes and they're really wanting to try to, you know, maybe get bigger, streamline their workflow maybe. I think that things like that are something to look into, because you can actually have people, you know, add their support to your show and feel like they're part of it, and you can give something back, you know. And I don't have very much to give to these guys, because you know, this is the whole episode right here. I don't do like a after party or something like that like some of these guys will do, but I'm getting in that direction, you know. But that's something to look at. And I was looking at your latest article that you'd put out on our blog, on rebelscreate.com, why you should work for free. And I thought that kind of tied into this really well, because I don't know how many of these groups I'm in where they talk about, you know, just like you had said, is, you know, somebody will say, well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read like just the very beginning sentence of it.
Sure.
It says, many creatives on a regular basis here, we can't pay you, but it'll be great exposure. And I know that a lot of you reply with, sorry, my landlord doesn't accept exposure. And I think that that is something that flies in the face of like what podcasting is about, and a lot of creative endeavors, because you're not this huge brand, and you know, you may be one day, but doing things for free and or just supporting the few people, which, like you showed your inverted pyramid, the people that are closer to you are the people that are going to be the ones that, you know, maybe are the ones that'll buy your shirts or buy your whatever down the line, you know. But to give them, you know, something without expecting something in return, I think that's huge, man. And it's cool that you, at the platform you have, and you being approached by these, you know, this big company, and eventually you guys are going to have even more success. It's cool that that's the model that you guys have in the back of your mind. I mean, that adds to you guys being, you know, pursuing greatness. I mean, it's huge that you're telling people to do that, like do that work for free, because eventually it's going to get to the point where, you know, you are priceless almost, and, you know, you're only going to have so many slots to be able to do things, and, you know, you're going to be making that money, you know. And not to say 100%.
That I think if someone is like fully booked out, and then they get an offer for working for free, then like, don't waste your time. But if you're sitting there like watching Netflix, and you could be out working and getting your name known, maybe you're not getting paid for it, but there's other, and I talk about it in the blog, there's other ways of getting payment. There's other things on offer. I think like that's a better use of your time than maybe what you are doing, which is like kind of not productive. And it's really funny, while you were talking about Patreon and stuff, it's like I was coming up with all of these arguments why you should have a Patreon. It's funny how I have issues with it for me, And I think that's because every individual person is always feels like kind of quite funny about asking people for money.
Oh yeah.
But then when you look at it on the flip side, it's like we spend like $100 a month on our cell phones. We spend like $5 a day on coffee.
Right.
We spend all of this money on things that are really, and we don't think about it at all. But you and I are spending an hour of our time tonight, like trying to help people, trying to entertain and inform people. And I mean, is it too much to ask that this show gets like $1 on Patreon? Like, buy me a coffee, like whatever it is. That's not really too much of an ask. And I think when you provide enough value to people, eventually they start to ask you, like, how can we support you? Like, what can we do for you? And that's the point where a sort of a Patreon, or if you're bringing a book out or whatever it might be, then that's the time where people will be happy to pay for that. I think there's just kind of a bit of a view of at the moment that anything on the internet is free. But I mean, that was one of the struggles when we first started Graffiti Life, was getting people to pay for this artwork that they could just go down the street and there's some graffiti. It's like it was a free commodity before that.
Wow, I didn't think about that.
So yeah, so it's like, and it's hard to get people to pay for art, and I mean, podcasting is art. It absolutely is art. So especially when you just have a conversation with like a really interesting guest and everything's clicking and everything's flowing, and you just like, there's sometimes I'm interviewing someone, I'm just like, oh, I can't wait for this episode to go out because I know that people are going to get so much value from it. And I think if you are providing that for your audience, then yeah, I think if you're providing that much value for your audience, then to ask for $1, or like, you won't even need to ask, because people will start offering it to you.
But just start throwing money at you.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if they can't afford it, then you don't want the money anyway. You know, it's like, but if you can spare like a cup of coffee, then help support the podcast, man. I think our favorite podcasts need to be subscribed to and help those guys out.
Yeah, and just to let anybody know, if you guys just subscribe and download the episodes, and even if you only, listen to them passively, absolutely helps us out in ways you guys have no idea. That's the stuff made of gold right there. And solid gold advice from you, David. Thank you so much for saying that stuff, man, because I feel very egotistical kind of talking about those things, myself, because it's like, oh, please pour me. But, and I'm not at that point. Like I have a full job, a full-time working job. Podcasting is a blast for me. It's my hobby. I put a lot of passion in these things, and it takes me a week to build out one of these episodes, even though it's just an hour long. I had one I did that took me 6 hours to edit, and I almost wanted to throw everything at the wall. And I just thought to myself, I said, am I doing this for me, or am I doing it, and at the end of the day, it really was just this amazing episode with an amazing band, a metal band based out of Denver. And I was just in love with the entire episode. And I probably had heard it about 50 times trying to edit the damn thing. But I just remember thinking to myself, I said, if I can get through this, you know what I mean, then I'm truly a podcaster, because it's that creative pursuit. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure you've done something and you throw it out, you throw it out and you start over again a few times, and eventually you're just in love with that piece because you put so much effort into it. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I totally relate.
So I guess one of the last things I kind of wanted to talk to you about, man, is so Graffiti Life, and just to give you. So it's Graffiti, Graffiti life.co.uk. That is your guys' company, but also your guys' website that you co-founded, and then also you do artwork for that as well, right?
Yeah. So that's our company. All of the kind of info about the stuff that we do is on the website there. We're on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @graffiti_life. Which is LIFE, and I get to paint on walls for a living. It's really fun.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So you guys have had some huge clients like Disney, Microsoft, Jedis, YouTube, Vice, Sony, like any of the big dogs. So just real quick, 30,000 foot view. What's like a day in the life of somebody that's broken out of the normal 9-to-5 cubicle world? What do you do? You go into work Monday. What's a typical day like when you're working on something for one of these companies, or even like a smaller project?
It's so different every day. I mean, fortunately now we're at the stage where we've got quite a big team. So I don't really get to paint that much anymore, which is a shame, because I love painting. But when you've got 15 employees and you're trying to run a business, there's lots of other less glamorous stuff that needs to happen on the day to day. But like, I mean, next week I'm giving a talk in Birmingham on Tuesday, and then I'm painting all day Monday, and then I've got a talk in Birmingham on Tuesday. Then that evening I'm part of a panel discussion in central London, and then I'm speaking at a school on Wednesday, and then I'm painting again on Thursday. So it's different every day, and that's one of the things I love about it, is that we get a lot of variety. So no day is the same, and you get to work with different clients who all have different visions and different briefs, and it's our job to sort of to squeeze the life out of those and create the best artwork for those clients. So it's really fun. I mean, yeah, it's literally a dream job.
Dude, it sounds so amazing. That's what I think about. I'm like, man, what a way to earn your income is to basically do what you love every day. And then beyond that, to really impress people, because it's not just, something basic like being like a house painter. You know what I mean? Like, you do something that people want to take pictures of and share and bring you in on talks. And I see you guys do workshops as well. And I'm sure that if somebody wanted to get in on one of your guys' workshops, they can find that through the site, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're super fun. We over the course of 90 minutes, we teach people how to paint kind of a basic graffiti piece, which is really fun. The only problem at the moment is that it's February and it's really cold in London. So our fingers are absolutely frozen at the moment. But other than that, yeah, couldn't wish for anything more.
Oh, that's huge, man. Well, I guess that's all I really had for you, man. I think I could talk to you for hours. If I wish I could have jumped across the pond and had this conversation over there in like a pub. I've always wanted to be in a UK pub, and I have so many friends that have gone, and I'm so jealous every time they come back. I'm like, give me the deets. What happened? Tell me everything. Because I think you guys live such a laid back lifestyle.
Yeah, we'll do it one day, man. We'll hook it up.
Yeah, it's got to happen. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. And I think if you guys are interested in any of the stuff that we talked about, including all the links, I'm going to have that in the description of the episode. And then, of course, I'm going to be putting out a bunch of their, with your blessing, David, a bunch of your guys' work. I'd like to just, share it across and show kind of the stuff you guys do, because the majority of what you do is visual. You know what I mean? We could talk all day, but really what you're doing is creating artwork that has to be seen to be appreciated.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, man. I appreciate you, David. We'll talk to you another time, my friend.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I loved having the conversation. Speak to you soon.
Okay, sounds good.